Welcome to Mini Math Lessons with Karen, and today we are looking at Classpad.net and we're going to be exploring proportional reasoning, so some basic beginning type of activities. So I'm in Classpad, free, all you can use math, it does statistics and graphing, like here's the description. So this is the website right here. You could just start exploring, you don't need an account. But for example, I'm sharing 2 activities today, and if you wanted to save them, you would need an account. So creating an account's free. I highly recommend you do that. Let me get right into the activities because this is just an overview of what's going on. So in this first activity, we're really kind of helping students understand what a ratio is. And so we've given them lots of examples to start with, and that you can write ratios. They're really a relationship, a quantitative relationship between 2 things, and a comparison. And you can write them in several different ways. So the rate, you could write it in words, you could write it as looks like a fraction, you could use it with the colon, you can switch the order as long as you keep that relationship that's been given to you consistent. So they start off with some examples of different ways you can write a single ratio. And then we're going to get into really helping them understand what is a ratio, what's other ways you can describe it, how do you compare them, how can you use ratios to answer questions, so proportional thinking, but without actually giving them a process or a rule. We tend to teach students how to cross multiply and divide to solve a proportion, and that's not really helping them understand what ratios are and what proportional thinking is. We want them to be able to come up with their own understanding of how these quantities relate and how they can use that relationship to find different answers and different future relationships or things like that. So this activity is really, I think it's like 8 questions, and they're all very similar, but it's more about, can you describe this relationship? Can you get an answer from it? We're not telling you how to do that. We're asking you to explain and try to figure things out, come up with your own kind of rules and explanations. And the key here is that every single one of these, they have to explain in multiple ways. So let's just look at one of them. We're not going to go through all of them because they're all, relatively similar, just different relationships. So is the ratio of 50 workers to 10 the same as the ratio of 15 workers to 5? So over here, we're going to say, okay, well, can you explain what that means? Well, this means for every 10 administrators, I should have 50 workers. So maybe I might think, well, if I have 5, that's half. So if I have half the administrators, 5, I should have half the number of workers. So that should be 25. So this ratio here doesn't seem to make sense. So I didn't actually do a cross multiply and divide. I'm actually thinking about the quantities. So, and the nice thing is they can write their answers in the text sticky several ways. We're asking them to describe. So maybe they think, okay, well, if I have 10 administrators and I have 50 workers, right, then I should have, so we can just write then 5 admins is half, so half the workers is 25. So they're going to say, oh, well, that doesn't work. So that's one way we could describe it, words and fractions and things like that. So that's the idea behind all of this, and they're just basically going to have to show in multiple ways how they're thinking about this. So that's the idea behind this whole activity. So you'll notice that each one is very similar. It gives them a ratio, asks them a question. As we get down into some of the later questions, it says, suppose the ratio of the number of students who get to at least a C is 8 to 10. If there's 130 students out of 155, is that meeting this ratio? So then they might want to say, oh, well, what's 8 to 10 as a percent? So I need 80%. So is 130 out of 155 also 80%? And it's more than 80%. So does that answer my question? And they could toggle back and forth between the decimal and the fraction if they want. But basically, there's lots of ways to describe this. So I could do it as a division problem. I could write it out in words. I could say, well, 8, I could do 8 over 30, is that the same as 10 over 155? Lots of ways to think about it, and that's what we're trying to get them. We're not giving them a rule or a process, they're just thinking about it. So that's the first activity. The second activity has to do with applying proportions in a real world, so mapping. If you read a map and it says, the scale is 2.4 centimeters on this map is the same as 25 actual miles. So you'll notice that they have to first describe which one do they think, distance on the map versus distance in the actual world, which one would be the independent, which one would be the dependent. They have to kind of explain why they think that is the case. And so that's not giving them any set directions, but explain why you think that happens, which one determines the other. And then based on that, then what would be a unit rate and what is a unit rate? So they're going to use a calculator to find their unit rate and then explain what the unit rate represents in terms of this situation, in terms of the map. So we're really helping them apply this rate. And then they're going to set up a table using their rate. So they're going to collect some data or basically make an expression that helps them, depending on what they determined was the independent and the dependent. They're going to calculate at least 8 things. And then we're going to make a scatter plot. So lots of things going on here using ratios and proportions, a relationship, that scale relationship between the map distance and the actual. And so then based on their graph, they're going to talk about what do they see, what kind of relationship do they see, and hopefully if they've done it right, a unit rate, they've seen a linear relationship. So then what does that actually mean in the context of this situation? And then they're going to use that to help them describe some distances. How far apart are the towns and those types of things. So this is just an application, but really a realistic application using maps and understanding the relationship between the ratio and how it's used to help us find actual distances. So that's where we're going with this activity. So in this activity, they're doing a lot. They're actually, coming up with their own unit rate. They're going to use that unit rate to help them create a table. They're going to use this table to make a scatter plot and use the scatter plot to visually look at the relationship, the proportional relationship, and they're going to see it has a linear relationship. What assumptions are we making? So lots going on in this activity. So both of them are relatively simple as far as the mathematics involved, but it's more about understanding what proportions and ratios are being used for in context.